Welcome one, welcome all. Welcome those who are joining us here on the Zoom. Welcome to those who are joining us on Chabad.org. Welcome to those who will be watching at a later time as it's posted online. Mazel tov, as tonight, and actually I'm in California, so it's a little early for me to say Mazel tov yet, but tonight on Chaf Hey Sivan, that is, we are, God willing, going to conclude Sefer Ahava, the book that engenders a love that teaches us to really connect to Hashem, and we're going to travel into Sefer Zmanim. I know when people study Daf Yomi, there's an expression that Bo Shabbos Ba Menucha. Everybody enjoys Maseches Brachas. It's very exciting, and then when Maseches Shabbos comes, everyone slows down a little bit. And there's a God forbid, there can be a similar trend that can lend itself and can rear its head when we study Rambam, because the truth is that, thank God, Sefer Amada, Sefer Ahava, the laws are relatively simple, the chapters are relatively short, so we're all excited. And now we're about to move into Sefer Zmanim, where the Rambam takes us through the 30 chapters of Shabbos, and the chapters are a little bit longer and more complex than Eruvin. So the Eibusha should bench each of us that just as we have and will, God willing, successfully complete with joy and with fastidious study the book of Ahava, so may the Eibusha bench us that we should be able to venture forth and travel into Sefer Zmanim. Welcome. We have a special guest. We have finished in this book studying Hilchos Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and mezuzas. And we have personally a friend, a local colleague, and a now renowned sofer. We'd like to welcome as our guest for the Siyum on Sefer Ahava, Rabbi Levi Potash. Rabbi Levi Potash, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a real honor and zechus to be part of this special event.
Thank you. Now, Rabbi Potash, there are many well-known sofrim around the world in Lubavitch, and the truth is that this necessarily, you moved out as a shliach to this area, and this has become your second career, if you will. So I guess I just want to ask you, you're a shliach like I am. How did it happen that you became a sofer? How does that happen that Rabbi Potash becomes a sofer?
So I just want to start out to say that actually I can put myself in the camp of some illustrious rabbis in history who were soferim, including the Rambam himself. If you paid attention in the laws of Sefer Torah, the Rambam makes a couple of mentions to the Torah himself that he himself wrote. So he wasn't just an amazing expert in all areas of halacha, but he was also a mastery of the art of being a sofer, and he wrote a Sefer Torah. So how did it start? So I actually came late into the game. My wife and myself, we moved out to Redwood City 12 years ago to be the Chabad shluchim and to open up a Chabad house there. And thank God that's going well. But a few years ago, I was talking to my colleague, Rabbi Chaim Zaklas, and he was talking about the need to should be a sofer in the Bay Area. And amazingly, even though there's over 250,000 Jews in the Bay Area, there is no sofer. Not someone who can write, not someone who can check. And so I said, you know something, I actually have a connection. So back when I was a kid, I never took official lessons, but I was curious about being a sofer. And so we had a teacher who was a sofer. And so one time I mustered up the courage to ask him for some ink and some parchment and a quill. And I started playing around, and I found a booklet in school that had the letters. And I basically taught myself how to write to make kosher letters. It wasn't anything fancy, it wasn't anything special, and then it was just that's what it was. I never pursued it.
How old were you?
At that age, I think I was 12 years old. And so it was just one of those
You've been training for many decades, you're saying.
It's actually funny because recently I was unpacking a bag that I had brought from England, and I actually found the original parchment that I'd been practicing on when I was 11 years old. So
how long does it actually take? How long did it take you from actually serious study to learn the halachas?
Right. So when Rabbi Chaim pointed out, I said, you know what? There's a need. I'm here to, don't forget that there's two areas of focus in the Chabad house, which is Tefillin and mezuzah, which is, of course, part of the Tem of Siyum. And so it was very important that we should promote that. And so I took upon myself to study. So from when I made that commitment until I was actually able to find a school that would work with me online, and I was able to do the lessons online and the testing, and we had to fly into New York for the testing. It took 3 years. It can be done faster, but don't forget, I was also wearing the hat as a rabbi, etc. So I couldn't put in full time, but I was able to put in part time. And of course, there's a lot of halachas, a lot of laws that you have to master, and a lot of technique. And so now I'm actually certified as a sofer and also as a magiha, which is someone who's able to check Torahs, Tefillin, and mezuzas to make sure they are kosher and to fix them when necessary and able to.
So let's go through the actual ksav. So people, when you say you write, we know, we hear about ksav Arizal, ksav Beis Yosef, ksav Alter Rebbe's ksav. So tell us, just give us in a nutshell. We have 15 minutes left over here, but give us a second. Are they all kosher? Can you write all of them? Which ones? I know that there's a big internal discussion as to whether the Rebbe's film were actually Arizal, Alter Rebbe, back and forth. But give us a little bit of the history in a nutshell. What is ksav Alter Rebbe? What does it mean? What do we say? Go ahead.
Okay, so briefly it goes like this. Today there are 4 handwriting styles. You could think of it as fonts that are common. There is the classic Ashkenazi font, which is known as the Beis Yosef, the Bet Yosef, even though that's a Sephardi rabbi, but that's a whole historical thing. That's for another time. There is the Sephardi handwriting, which is called Ksav Velish. And then there is what's called Ksav Ari, the Arizal, which is within the Ashkenazi font. It is with some variations, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And then there is the Alter Rebbe's hand Ksav, which is a blend of the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi handwriting, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So first of all,
Alter Rebbe just came up with this new ksav all of a sudden.
Okay, so before I go there, I want to clarify that as long as the letters have the basic requirements brought down in the Gemara and the Talmud as to what makes a kosher letter, they are kosher. So all of these handwritings all are kosher. So we're not discussing here about what is kosher. Of course, it's better to use the custom of your community, but if for whatever reason you don't have access to, they are kosher. So, but the question is, what's the ideal handwriting? So the story with the Alter Rebbe's ksav is actually a fascinating story. And that is to give a background that the Ashkenazi ksav font is more in line with the halachic parameters of the handwriting. That they were much more focused on what does the Gemara say, what does the Shulchan Aruch say, etc. The Sephardi handwriting had a lot of influence from the Kabbalah and the Arizal, and so the Sephardi handwriting has some differences, and then the Arizal handwriting brings some of those differences into the Ashkenazi handwriting. So it's trying to kind of make a blend, but basically the Maggid Mezrich, who was the student of the Baal Shem Tov, he called in the Alter Rebbe one day and he said, we have a problem. We have a big argument between the opinions of the Halacha and the opinions of Kabbalah as to how the handwriting should be. And I need you to figure it out. I need you to make a tweak the handwriting so that it should make everybody happy. And so the Alter Rebbe was an unbelievable guy in Halacha and also a tremendous genius in Kabbalah. And he was an amazing mind. There's no need to go on extolling the virtues of the Alter Rebbe, but basically he spent a few weeks in Mezrich going through all of the details, and he designed a new handwriting, which is obviously based on the handwriting. If you saw the letters, you would recognize them. In fact, I actually did a little diagram here just to show you on one simple letter. So I don't know if you can see it in mirror image or in the regular, but if you look at this one right here, this is the Arizal Gimel. Okay, so you can see that the main stick, the main shaft, comes out from the middle of the head, which is like a Zion. If you look at the next one, which is called Velish, which is the Sephardi handwriting, you can actually see that the top over there is like a Vav, right? So the head of the Gimel is like a Vav. And this is one of the main arguments between the Halacha and the Kabbalah as to whether these letters, a lot of the letters should be shaped like a Zion and then with more detail, or like a Vav. So came along the Alter Rebbe, and if you look at the head over here, he has this fascinating compromise where if you look from the one side, it looks like a Vav, and if you look from the other side, it looks like a Zion. And so these are some of these ingenious compromises that the Alter Rebbe made. He went through all the Aleph base. There's a bit of a discussion exactly which details are from him and which are from his sofer. And basically he
What's the name of the sofer? Who had a sofer?
So the Alter Rebbe had his own personal sofer that he trusted to write for him, Reb Reuven from Yanovich, which was a town. And then once he decided on the font, he was traveling home and he stopped off in his town and he taught him all of the letters exactly as they should look like. And so from then on, people who were influenced by the Alter Rebbe started writing this way. There's even a story about Reb Zusha of Anipali writing this way and other Hasidim. Practically today, I would say that the Beis Yosef Ksav is popular among the Ashkenazim, and the Velish Ksav is popular with the Sfardim. The Arizal Ksav is popular with Hasidim, and the Alter Rebbe's Ksav is popular by Chabad, although there are some other Russian communities that also have some variations of the Alter Rebbe's Ksav. And the truth is that there's some details about the Alter Rebbe's Ksav that, because there were different debates about some of the details, that some people have asked questions about it. So there are some people in Chabad who also use the Arizal Ksav, but I would say the majority of Chabad today uses the Alter Rebbe's Ksav.
And when you hear people say it's hard to write it, is it, you're a sofer, is it Taka the hardest Ksav to write?
Yes, so it really is. Personally, the first Ksav that I started practicing on was Arizal, and I have not yet trained in the Alter Rebbe, so I can only write the Arizal Ksav. Again, they're all kosher, but it's just about which minhag, which custom you're following. It is really difficult. And one of the challenges with the Alter Rebbe is that if you don't do it correctly, there are some, like in every handwriting, but with the Alter Rebbe, it's a little more sensitive to some nuances. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can make some of the letters not kosher. So it's important, personally, I have Alter Rebbe's Ksav Tefillin and mezuzas, and I encourage people to use that Ksav, but one should be careful to use a reputable sofer who has great experience and expertise to make sure that the letters come out the way they're supposed to.
Okay. Yasher koyach, that was very good. Okay, in 2 seconds, you gave us the history. Let's move on to a different topic. And this is a real question. I mean, everyone has, the Rebbe told so many times, check tefillin, dikas tefillin, mezuzas, check it tefillin, mezuzas, check it tefillin, mezuzas. I mean, it has a spiritual component as well. But you buy a mezuzah, it's kosher. You had it checked once, you had it checked twice. It's on your bedroom door. There's no leaks, there's no rains, there's no sun, there's no dry. What is there, maybe there isn't, I'm asking, but what is Vedas Tachton? That means practically, what is the purpose of me checking my mezuzahs over and over and over again? It's inside, what could happen? Seriously.
Okay, so we need to clarify that there is a din in Shulchan Aruch that you have to check your mezuzahs twice in 7 years. So tefillin is actually, not as necessary, but mezuzahs are necessary. And there is a minhag to check your tefillin and mezuzahs once a year, and elul, special hidur, etc. But when it comes to the practical side of it, so when you're dealing with cheap mezuzahs, like at the bottom level basic kosher, then you certainly have to check them on a regular basis because basically like any quality, the quality is inferior, the parchment is inferior, the ink is inferior, and so it's much easier for letters to crack, etc. So if somebody has basic kosher mezuzahs, they are kosher, but they do need checking more often from a practical standpoint. But amazingly, I'll tell you a story that happened to me just last year. And you think, oh yeah, I buy an expensive $200, $250 Alter Rebbe mezuzah, muhutter, 20 centimeter. So I'm checking this mezuzah, and it was actually in someone's place. And so we were taking down, he had like 30 mezuzahs, beautiful Alter Rebbe's mezuzahs. I'm going through one by one. And all of a sudden, I let out a scream. There was literally an extra word. The word bum was there twice in the mezuzah. And it was unbelievable. I called over the owner and I showed him, and he couldn't believe it. He said to me, I've had these mezuzahs checked 6 times in the past 10 years. So 6 times a sofer had been looking over that mezuzah and had not caught that mistake. And that's not really a condemnation of soferim. We're all human beings, and soferim are human beings too. And so unfortunately, it does happen. Obviously, there's better ones and more conscientious ones and less. And so you have to be discerning who you send your things to. But people are human, and so it was overlooked. But then somebody asked me, he said, "But what about the computer check? Why didn't the computer check catch this extra word?" So the basic point about computer checking, which is a great thing, and it's become almost industry standard now, that any mezuzah, tefillin, Sefer Torah that you buy will be checked once, twice, etc. But the secret that's not realized, that people don't realize, is that the computer is the one only alerting you to potential issues, but it's still a person who's standing behind the computer who has to make decisions about it. And so the program is specifically designed to be extra sensitive because we don't want the computer to overlook a mistake. So instead, the computer will find mistakes that are not really mistakes. It alerts you there's an issue. So I would say it's about 10 to 1. Only about 10% of the things that the computer is going to tell you is an issue is actually an issue. So the guy's looking at the computer screen, boom, he gets an alert. He has to go now back to the actual mezuzah or tefillin or Sefer Torah and look at the problem. he checks it. If it's okay, he goes further. If it's a problem, he fixes it. So what happens is over time, things can happen. But specifically when it comes to extra words, this is a hang-up. It's because the computer check will only tell you that this is a problem. This letter shouldn't be here, but it doesn't tell you what should be there. So if the sofer sees the alert from the computer and then he goes back to the mezuza and he looks at the letter base, he's like, this letter base is fine. He looks at the letter mem, this letter mem is fine. Oh, obviously the computer is being overly sensitive. But meanwhile, the computer was telling you there's a whole extra word here, but it doesn't say those words. It just tells you this letter is not the way it's supposed to be. So a lot of things can fall through the cracks, even though, of course, the computer checking is a great tool and everybody has to, you keep checking, but unfortunately, it was a $250 Mehuder Alter Rebbe mezuzah that had been checked 6 times that had an extra word, which amazingly can be fixed because you have to write the mezuzah and the tefillin in order, but because it was an extra word, you're allowed to erase an extra word and the whole mezuzah was still written in order. So I actually had the new experience of erasing a whole word, and as long as you make sure the gap is not too big, we were able to make the mezuzah kosher, but until then, it was not a kosher mezuzah.
Wow. So you're saying the Eibishter decides when God decides it's time for your mezuzah to be checked kosher, it's kosher, okay? You have to have siyata d'shmaya.
Yeah.
Okay, Rabbi Potash, last thing before we actually have you please conclude the sefer for us. We just studied the Rambam, we studied Hilchos Sefer Torah, Tefillin and mezuzas. Is there anything that you can tell us from the Rambam, which is something which relates, I mean, obviously many of the halachas relate to practical day-to-day life, but is there anything that comes to mind about the Rambam that you can share with us as we get ready to conclude Sefer Ahava?
Well, first of all, I mentioned in the beginning that the Rambam himself was a sofer, and he wrote his own Sefer Torah, obviously because it's actually a mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah, and the way we fulfill that mitzvah today is in 2 ways, because we can fulfill the spirit of the mitzvah, which is Sfarim. The point of having a Sefer Torah is to have something to learn from. So today we have a printed Sfarim. By having a house full of Sfarim, and especially Sfarim focused on Halacha to know what to do, we're able to fulfill that mitzvah, but also to participate in a community effort to write a Sefer Torah is a way that we can do that mitzvah even if we don't know how to write. But a couple of things, interesting things that pop out at me from the Rambam. One of the things that's not so well known is something called Pein Mulufafos. If you look in the Rambam, I believe it's in Perek Zion, he talks about the special letters. It's in Perek Zion Halacha Ches. He talks about the special letters, the big letters and the small letters and the letters with dots and letters that are backwards. So a lot of these things we still do today, but one of them kind of over the years fell into, it disappeared, and that is the Pein Mulufafos, which is basically a pay within a pay. There was a tradition about certain pays in the Torah that is inside the pay, and you can search online for Pein Mulufafos, and you'll see a picture right there. And it's just one of these strange characters about the Torah. Most people don't know about it because in the vast majority
inside
of
the pay, there's what? Inside the pay, there's what?
Inside the pay, there's another pay. So you keep the twirl, you do the twirl of the pay, and then at the yud of the pay, you make another pay in much smaller font. It's all connected, and it's one twirl. It's basically 2 pays, one inside the other. And today, the only ones who still do this are the Teimanim. They kept the tradition all this time, but in all the other communities over the years, many doubts arose as to which pays are supposed to be this way.
Do you know if it's in Tefillin Mezuzah also, or do you know if it's only in Sefer Torah?
This is only in Sefer Torah. It's only in Sefer Torah. Now, we do have many differences that we still have. We have the big letters. Of course, we know about the big letters in the Sefer Torah, Isis Rabasi, and we have the small letters. We have letters with dots on top of them. We have the backwards nun, the 2 nuns we just had in Bar Loischa, by Yid and Sarah Aron, the 2 backwards nuns. So most of these traditions we still have and were kept, and because we know what they are, we're able to continue it. But unfortunately, over the years, the pay, there was also an interesting ches that some had the tradition to do, and over the years it got lost, and so only the Teimanim do it today. But if we find a Torah from Ashkenazim 300-400 years ago, we're doing these kind of, so you can find all Sefer Torah from that time that will be like that, and the halacha is, as long as everything else is fine, it's kosher, because that was the minhag, and so who are we to say that they got it wrong? So that is one interesting thing. Another interesting thing is a halacha of the Rambam that is actually relevant to the halachas of Kriyas HaTorah, and that is in Perek Yud of the Rambam in Hilchos Sefer Torah. He talks about a kosher Sefer Torah, and he says that if you don't have all of the criteria, then it's not kosher, and you're not allowed to read it in public. But what's interesting is that there's a tshuva, a responsa of the Rambam, where someone sent a letter to the Rambam asking the question, what do I do if we have a community, we don't have a kosher Sefer Torah, can we lane from a non-kosher Sefer Torah? And so the Rambam says, yes, you are allowed to, because it says you have to understand the difference. There's two things over here. One is the mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah. And for that mitzvah, you have to do it correctly, follow all the rules. There's a separate thing, there's a minhag, a mitzvah from the Chachamim, from Moshe Rabbeinu, depending on which time of the week, to lane the Torah in public as part of the community, part of the congregation. So says the Rambam, that does not need to be kosher. It's better for it to be kosher, but it does not need to be kosher. So it turns out that when the Rambam says in the actual Rambam, if you remember from Perek Yud, in the 10th chapter, he was talking about ideally, but then in the responsa, he's talking about b'di'evet, if you don't have any other choice, can you read from it? So why is this relevant? What's relevant to us is that most opinions hold that you cannot read from a Torah that is not kosher, even and not like the Rambam. But being that the Rambam is such a major halachic authority, and there's some other opinions who agree with him, we rely on him in emergency situations. So what happens if you're reading in the Torah in the synagogue, and you're halfway through the Torah reading, and you discover a mistake? So the halacha is that you're supposed to put away the Torah. Depending on the mistake, there's lots of complicated laws, but the general concept is, if it's a clear mistake, you close the Torah, you put it back, and you bring out a kosher Sefer Torah. But now, where should you start reading from? If the Torah is not kosher, maybe you should go back to the beginning of the portion that you're supposed to read today, because it was read from a non-kosher Torah. So you say, no, we rely on the Rambam, being that the Rambam says you were allowed to do that. So we already did it. We're not going to go now and do the whole thing again. We're going to, whatever we did was done, and we rely on the Rambam, and going forward, we read from the kosher Torah. And another example would be, if you were in a community that you did not have a kosher Sefer Torah and you only had a non-kosher one, there are many opinions that say that you could rely on the Rambam in this emergency situation and use a non-kosher Torah to read in public. But obviously, it's better. Everybody
you heard
agrees
it here from Rabbi Potash. You're allowed to use a non-kosher Torah. No.
For practical halachic guidance, you make sure to ask your halachic authority. But it is amazing how the Rambam, being such a major pillar of halacha throughout the centuries, being that this was his opinion, is taken very seriously. And even though we ideally do not follow in this detail, but we can rely on him in an emergency situation. So, but the bottom line is, of course, we should make sure to have lots of Torahs in the synagogue, and it should be beautiful and kosher, and we should get a chance to participate in it and do it in the best way, as the Rambam himself would say we should do.
Yasha Koyach, thank you, Rabbi Potash. So the Eibishter God should give you long, healthy years to be able to continue being meifetz in your personal shlichus, but as well all around the world with Tefillin, Sefer Torah, mezuzas. Thank you, Yasha Koyach. And now, if we can please ask you, we'll put up on the screen, to please, on behalf of all of us and all those who are watching and going to watch, to please be Messiah, the entire book of Ahava. Now, it's actually not as simple. Where do we actually, those who have studied, what is the conclusion of this book? It's not clear. Are we going to conclude with the last halacha, which is at the end of the laws of Bris Milah, or are we going to conclude at the end of the davening, the tefillah that he's gone through? So this is a discussion and back and forth, but we're actually going to conclude with Milah today. Those who have a different opinion, you can join a different Siyum. Here we go. Let me pull this up over here. I'm sorry. And we're going to join over here. Here we go. Please, if we can ask your Rabbi Potash to please read for us and be Messiah in the entire book. Go ahead.
Hebrew and English?
No, yeah, you can paraphrase in the English as necessary.
Okay. Come and see how serious a bris milah circumcision is. Moshe was not allowed, even for one moment, to get away with not doing it, even though he was traveling. All of the mitzvahs of the Torah are only incorporated into 3 covenants between Hashem and the Jewish people. Shneimar, there's 3 verses that refer to the covenant of the general Torah system. So we have 3 references in the Torah to the fact that there is this covenant between Hashem and the Jewish people about the whole Torah system. There's only 3 mentions of a bris, of a covenant. But But when it comes to circumcision, Avram Avinu, our forefather, had 13 references to the covenant, to this special agreement between Hashem and Avram, and by extension, the Jewish people, all around just this one mitzvah of the bris. And then the Rambam lists off all the 13 verses. I will make this covenant with you, etc. It's basically saying the same thing over and over again, all the times when Hashem is speaking to Avram. Between me and you, Levris Olam forever. Make sure to keep the covenant. It should be a covenant on your flesh, Levris Olam forever. I will establish this covenant forever. And I will pass on this covenant with Yitzchak, your son, and by continuation with all the Jewish people. Blessed be Hashem that we've completed these halachas and the Sefer of Ahava.
Yashakayach, thank you very, very much. Thank you, Yashakayach. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're now going to immediately begin to learn the first halacha, Perak Aleph, Halacha Aleph, Shvisa v'Shvi Memlacha Mitzvah Aseh. It is a positive mitzvah for us to cease from all activity, from all productive malacha on the Shabbos day, on the 7th day we should rest. If someone does engage in malacha, then bitam in mitzvah aseh, he has neglected to fulfill this positive mitzvah, and he's violated a prohibition, a negative prohibition. The Torah tells us not to do any work. What is the punishment given by the courts? And if he consciously, willingly, purposefully violates Shabbos, chayav karetz, then he's going to be spiritually cut off from Hashem. And if there were actually witnesses who warned him, then Niskav in the court will issue the skila, stoning. Also, if he didn't realize that he was violating Shabbos, then chayav karban chatas kavua, he is obligated to bring a karban chatas that has a set value. Yashakaya, thank you very much. And on behalf of everyone, I'd like to apologize that there is no quiz. I know that this is a favorite for many, and especially the winners of the prize enjoy it. But please do join us after the lengthy book of Zmanim that we will cover Be'ezah Hashem Yisbarech as we go Mechael El Chayil. Thank you very, very much to all those who work behind the scenes to make today's Siyum possible. Hatzlacha Rabba, a good evening, a good morning, a good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Hatzlacha, and thank you very much.